our grade 10 digital content on Christian religious education learning area, and the strand is the New Testament, which is the second strand, and the sub-strand is Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. And the lesson concept, causes of divisions in the Church of Corinth. Now, outcomes, specific learning outcome. By the end of this presentation, a grade 10 learner should be able to describe the causes of divisions in the Church of Corinth. The first cause of divisions in the Church of Corinth is identification with specific leaders. Paul tried to address a problem that emanated from Corinthians claiming that they belonged to different leaders, and specifically here, some were identifying with Apollos, others with Cephas, and others with Christ. That can be referred from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 12. To address this, Paul made them discover that none of them, that is Apollos, Cephas, and others, was baptized in the name of Paul. And then he guided them further to discover that he and others who were working with him were mere servants through whom they believed. For your further reading, go and get that verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 5. The second cause of divisions in the church at Corinth is boasting or pride. Corinthians boasted because of the wisdom of this world. They had been influenced by the philosophy of Greeks who sought wisdom, and Jews who demanded signs, as quoted in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 22. Apostle Paul guided them to discover how the wisdom of God was opposed to the wisdom of men. Therefore, he encouraged Corinthians to boast of the Lord, as quoted in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 31. The third cause of division is abuse of spiritual gifts. The Corinthians were proud and bragged of the spiritual gifts they had. Instances of people claiming spiritual superiority over one another were common. Those with visible spiritual gifts, like speaking in tongues, began to think they are more valuable than those with less visible gifts, like the gift of knowledge. They did not understand that the gifts given by God made one a steward of God. To solve this, Paul encouraged the Corinthians to regard them as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. So, to speak, Paul wanted the Corinthians to discover that God is the giver of gifts, and once he gives the gifts, he means those gifts to be used in his service and for his glory. Another cause of division in the church at Corinth, which is our fourth, is suing others in human or public courts. This was a common weakness among the Corinthians. Paul urged that it was only God who had authority to judge. That is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 3 to 4. Paul also discouraged Corinthians from making judgment before God comes, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 5. The fifth cause of division was immorality. The Church of Corinth had rampant cases of sexual immorality. Apostle Paul refers to Corinthians as men of the flesh. That is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 1 to 3. To solve this, Paul cautioned that they are God's temple and the Spirit of God dwells in them. Paul encourages them to be holy as a way of preserving the holiness of God's temple, which is their body. The last, but not least, cause of division was elitism. The Church of Corinth had people who were learned in the wisdom of the world. This wisdom of the world, according to Apostle Paul, was opposed to the wisdom of God. To address this, Paul taught the Corinthians that the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than the weakness of men. So, in summary, we have talked about 6 causes of divisions at the Church of Corinth and how Paul, in his wisdom, boldly addressed them. So we ask ourselves the questions: do we have divisions in our churches today? And as young people, how often do we become part of the solution to these problems that are likely to cause disunity and make many believers drop out of church? So it's our task to use the examples that St. Paul illustrated in the letter to the Corinthians to solve the challenges that threaten unity in our churches. Thank you very much. My name is Duke Makori. For more of this content, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much and be blessed.